everybody, and welcome to another amazing episode of Thyroid Refresh TV. I'm Dana Bowman, co-founder of Thyroid Refresh and Thyroid 30.
And I'm Ginny Mahar, the other co-founder of Thyroid Refresh and Thyroid 30, and we are so excited to be here today with Phoebe Lapine. Welcome, Phoebe.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Did I pronounce that right?
Yeah, you did actually.
Before we get started, I just want to share with all of our listeners, if you don't know who Phoebe is, she is a food writer, gluten-free chef, culinary instructor, recipe developer, thyroid advocate, and author of the memoir, The Wellness Project, How I Learned to Do Right by My Body Without Giving Up My Life. Oh, how great. She, on her award-winning blog, Feed Me, Phoebe, she shares recipes for healthy comfort food, gluten-free finds, and insights about balanced lifestyle choices beyond food. She's based in New York City, and she's given thousands of people the tools to eat cleaner with her original, accessible approach to cooking nourished meals from scratch. She's been featured in Cosmopolitan, Marie Claire, Self, Shape, Glamour, and lots of other places. And we are just really, really thrilled to have her on the show today. Thanks, Phoebe.
Yay! Great to be here.
So we're really excited to have you because we definitely feel like we are of the same cloth. You know, we're all thyroid patients who have walked this path and became inspired through our journeys to share our stories with others and to try and help them. Can you tell us a little bit about your story and what inspired you to write your book and do all the work that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's when I was 22 by my regular doctor, which is, incredibly lucky since so many people don't end up getting a diagnosis. But, being kind of more on the conventional side of things, she didn't explain that it was autoimmune disease and basically just told me that it was no big deal. I would just have to be on medication for the rest of my life. And I think just being young at the time and, I wasn't really holistically minded per se, but I was raised with a mom who was definitely into homeopathy and all sorts of other natural treatments. So just hearing like pill for the rest of your life, I was just like, okay, no, I'm not going to sign up for that. And the instinct was right there, but then I just went on living my life as if the conversation never happened because I wasn't told, kind of what the correlation of symptoms was. I just didn't feel like researching it because I wasn't really feeling that sick at the time. And then in kind of the years that followed, I say I like slowly wound my way down health mountain and started to experience all of those symptoms that so many of this community, I'm sure, are intimately familiar with. One of the ones I had horrible digestive discomfort, had to stop exercising because I would get such bad cramps within half a block. Of course, was so exhausted all the time, yet couldn't sleep through the night without waking up in like a pool of my own sweat. Huge temperature regulation, would have like hot flashes on the New York City subway in the middle of winter. And eventually though, since I was an aspiring chef and food writer at the time, and the digestive pain was kind of an occupational hazard, I eventually wound up in the office of more of a holistically minded functional medicine doctor who gave me kind of like the first intro to like an elimination diet, and I ended up going off of gluten because I felt so much better without it. But again, he didn't explain to me kind of like the whole tie between gluten and Hashimoto's. But eventually kind of like in that part of my journey, once I started dipping into the more of the holistic side of things, I found myself getting very confused by all the conflicting opinions out there on autoimmune disease and how to treat that and Hashimoto's, and just feeling like as a young 20-something incredibly overwhelmed. So kind of from denial to overwhelm. And that's where I kind of ended up taking a step back and coming up with this concept of the Wellness Project, which I borrowed from Gretchen Rubin's The Happiness Project. And she kind of took a type A approach and decided to like divvy up her year into these different mini challenges. And for me, I just kind of decided to take this whole laundry list of things that my naturopath was recommending and segment them to kind of unravel or re-ravel my body one piece at a time. So the idea was not necessarily to become my healthiest self and to heal my Hashimoto's, though of course, like that would be nice. But it was really like, I'd say my mission and what I really felt like was missing in the world of wellness was kind of approach that said, okay, let's actually figure out what's worth my time, money, and energy. Like it's going to cause too much stress to become the healthiest person on the planet. So let's really figure out what's sustainable. And some of the challenges were a little bit more intense than others. But the idea was always to kind of find moderation going forward. So I covered everything from, the concept of detox to hydration, sleep, stress management, hormone balance, of course, movement, posture. What am I forgetting? Green beauty, like cleaning up my personal care products. I think I've named most of them. Gut health, just kind of breaking it up into different categories and then going really deep on, kind of the how of it. Because I think a lot of the things I was reading online and a lot of the books that I was reading really just focused on the what. And I also then researched further to dig into the why, but, kind of the whole concept and kind of why I wanted to write a memoir / health book was to help people who are really trying to figure out how to make healthy choices fit into real life, get some strategies from someone in the trenches, and not, sitting in an office with a lab coat or what have you.
Well, that definitely resonates with Dana and I because, that's one of our mottos here is there's so much information out there about what to do, but we're trying to help show people and give them tools for how to do it.
Yeah.
It's the how, right? And I love the book so much. I'm reading it right now. I was just telling Phoebe before we started recording. And I think what's so special about it is that it's different in that it doesn't, you obviously did a lot of research. You're in New York City, so you have some incredible resources and connections to lean on that are all, cited in the book. But it's a real thyroid patient going through this and trying to adopt a thyroid-friendly lifestyle and peeling back those layers piece by piece by piece, 1 month at a time, and going into each one, in a sort of deep dive is really so relatable for, any thyroid patient to read that, anyone who really wants to get better. But I'm curious, how are you feeling these days? Where are you at on your journey?
Yeah, so I actually, since we're at year end, I just wrote my, 3-year wellness project update. Can't believe it was 3 years ago. Kind of crazy. And yeah, it's so funny because at the time when I conceived of the project, a year felt like a really long time, to like dedicate to your health, like what a marathon. But I'm kind of realizing as I get older that like it's unrealistic to think that you can heal any part of your body in a meaningful way in less amount of time. So I've kind of had these wellness project 2.0 and 3.0 things crop up because, and I say this in the end of the book, which you'll get to eventually, but yeah, the promise of like reversing an illness and healing, like that's not always realistic for everyone. Obviously that would be an amazing goal, but there's something, there's something about transformation myths that have always not sat well with me. And I knew I didn't want to write a kind of book that would propagate that, even though it probably would have sold more copies if I had. But the reality is that I very much, like on paper, the healing was major in terms of what my blood work looks like at the beginning of the wellness project versus the end, and certainly spiritually and in my day-to-day normal, much higher level by the end. But I think that looking back, I still had some root causes that I hadn't necessarily like fully honed in on. And one of them for me is gut health. And it's just going to be a recurring theme for me over and over again. And so last year when I did my 2-year update, I'd finally kind of post-book tour, which was its own beast and like caused a lot of stress in my life.
Right.
Like a lot of emotional stress. And then there was a lot of travel too, putting this thing out into the world. But yeah, I was starting to feel some like digestive symptoms like crop back up. So I went back to a different functional medicine doctor, and eventually he tested me for something called SIBO and small intestine bacterial overgrowth. And that came back positive. So this was this time last year. And so my Wellness Project 2.0 this past year has been dealing with that. And it's been a really interesting journey. And it's one that, you know, the silver lining for any kind of health setback is always that I get to share my resources with my audience and with other people. And I just, you know, in some ways, like I'm so happy it happened when it did, because there's still a lot of awareness that needs to happen around SIBO. It affects so many people, and it's been crazy the response that I've gotten since I started writing about it. My
Does
mom,
it affect a lot of thyroid patients?
yeah, so Hashimoto's and hypothyroidism in general is a huge risk factor for SIBO, and it's for a million kind of complicated reasons, but essentially one of them is just slow motility. So constipation, big symptom when you're hypothyroid. Your migrating motor complex, which is kind of the street sweeper of your small intestines, just doesn't work as well. And basically the breakdown of that functionality is a big precursor to SIBO. And yeah, so I can't remember what the statistic is for hypothyroidism and SIBO. I'm not sure it's like even really known at this point, but SIBO is said to account for about 60 to 70% of all IBS diagnoses. So it's a huge population of people, but again, like the awareness isn't really there. And I think as it spreads, as more gastroenterologists and, you know, just people in the public learn about it, it's gonna be not an epidemic. I mean, it already is affecting a lot of people, but we're just going to see a lot more talk about it. So where I'm sitting right now, like happy to be done with SIBO, of course, got some more gut tests back, a lot of other issues there too of dysbiosis, which we were just talking about, and SIBO is a type of dysbiosis. And I just found out I also have H. pylori, which is another precursor to SIBO. So it's like all of these like roundabout root causes that all contribute to one another. And I was pretty down on myself a few weeks ago. I'm like, I work so hard. Like, right. Why do I keep like not another hurdle? But yeah, it's the reality of my life. And even keeping all of like the good habits that I've honed post Wellness Project, like it's my journey, and it's like there is no like bookend on it. I'm still going.
It's lifelong, isn't it?
Yeah.
Cyclic.
That's what I was going to say. I was like, you know, I was thinking when you said that a few minutes ago, I was thinking, I love that you make it seem like this is just you, because it is, but also very relatable because it's never going to end. It just, yeah. I mean, people can reverse their diagnoses, and it has happened, but for most people,
you have to catch it early though.
Right.
You know, I waited like 7 years before I took mine seriously. I went unmedicated for 7 years.
Wow.
And was like treating my body with no respect in the process. So, you know, I really got to the bottom of Health Mountain. I think people who just like catch it early, like the reversal is a lot more realistic.
Or, you know, whatever they have had growing up, you know, where their root causes were and things. Yeah, I mean, it really is just very personal, very bio-individual. Can you tell the listeners what the testing is like for SIBO while we're on that a little bit?
So it's an interesting test. It's a breath test. So essentially, I'll explain a little bit about what it is. So small intestine bacterial overgrowth, exactly what it sounds like. But it's not necessarily pathogenic bacteria. It's just that most people don't realize when we talk about the microbiome and that the fact that, you know, 70% of our gut bacteria, 70% of our microbiome, our bacteria is in our gut, is mostly in the large intestine, so the colon. And there's very little that's supposed to be in the small intestine because it's where we absorb our nutrients. So if there were bacteria there would be fighting for those resources, since bacteria like to eat. So it's really not a good or bad situation. It's a location issue. So hence why you can imagine if you're not having the street sweeper moving things down into your large intestines, why you can end up having some sort of buildup. So the test is you drink a sugar solution, which is bacteria's favorite food, carbohydrates. And then you blow into these little tubes every 20 minutes. And essentially they're looking for the off-gassing of the bacteria eating that food. So when you measure it kind of every 20 minutes, you can see the location of when those numbers hit. And essentially, it's supposed to hit around the 2.5, 3 hour mark, because that's when the food reaches your large intestine. But if you have levels of hydrogen or methane, two different gases, earlier in that process, that's an indication of SIBO. And it's really important to test because the treatment is very complicated and very much relies on what type of gas that you test for. And also you're going to want to make your decision based on kind of how high the levels are.
Wow. Okay.
That's so fascinating. That's not what I was expecting you to say at all.
Oh yeah. You thought it was a stool test?
Yeah, or maybe a blood test or something.
Right.
But yeah, that's fascinating. And so with that, the timed intervals, then they can tell like the location of the overgrowth.
Yeah, it's very cool. And there's now as SIBO becomes more prevalent and more of like a buzzword, like there are, of course, like doctors are like, that's not a real thing, that doesn't exist. But for me, just like common sense, like intellectually, the way the test works, it's like, of course, like that's such a clear indication that something's wrong.
Definitely.
Now, do people typically need to go to like a functional MD to get this test, or will
you can take it at home yourself? But it's less likely to be covered by insurance if you do it that way without a doctor's recommendation. And B, like if you don't know that much about it, like you really do need a practitioner to help you like analyze the numbers and tell you exactly where it's hitting, explain the two different types of gases that you could be reporting for. It's a really complicated condition and it's hard to do on your own. And there are a lot of specialists in the community right now. And the reason is because it's just like not that many people, even like a lot of holistic functional medicine doctors are not necessarily like that well versed in it.
So what's the treatment like?
So there are a bunch of different options. And again, it really depends on what your tests come back with. But there's a conventional antibiotic. One of them is not too bad. It's not one that's going to kind of bomb your entire system. It's very targeted to the small intestine. But then in studies, an herbal antibiotic, like an herbal blend, herbal antimicrobial has tested just as well. So there are two different options there. And then there's something called the elemental diet, which is, just sounds miserable. I didn't have to do that and I hope to never have to do it, but it's essentially like a formula you drink for 2 weeks and don't eat anything else. And you're essentially just feeding yourself and starving out the bacteria.
Wow.
So like
moly.
By starvation.
So no sugar, I'm assuming. Is that?
Yeah, no, I mean, the elemental, it's like literally just like your basic nutrients in their most basic form so that they absorb kind of like immediately as soon as they enter the intestines and don't have time to like make it to the bacteria.
Okay.
Let's hope nobody has to do that.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. So it's actually incredibly effective. So if you have really high gases, you might just be like, all right, like 2 weeks elemental diet.
It's an option. Yeah. Right. Wow.
I'm doing this, I have a podcast coming out in the new year all about SIBO, which I know is not the sexiest topic, but again, like we're so lacking in resources. I just knew I had to do it, but I've been interviewing all of these doctors and practitioners and my first talking about elemental diet, I'm like, who would want to do that? And these doctors like, you'd be surprised. Some people are like, great, I don't have to cook. Like, I just like, it sounds like the easiest thing.
Wow.
I would not enjoy it, but
But we love food.
I know, exactly. I'm like, those people don't like food as much as I do.
Evidently not. Okay, so when can you tell the listeners when this does launch? So they'll know.
Yes, it's going to launch on January 16th.
Okay.
But the trailer will be available pretty soon. So SIBO Made Simple is the name, and you can check out the iTunes store for it.
Awesome.
Cool.
Well, that's going to be a really wonderful resource. I know already.
I hope so. And actually, I'm launching with one episode that's all about the thyroid connection, and there's so much good information about it. I'm like going to tell my audience, like, anyone with Hashimoto's just needs to listen to this episode, SIBO or no SIBO, because especially, I mean, it is a risk factor, so people kind of need to know about some of these things for prevention. And
do you have somebody special on that first episode?
Sorry,
do you have someone special, a specialist?
Yeah.
Okay.
Dr. Jolene Brighton, she's amazing. She is a women's health specialist and does all this great work around hormones. So yeah, it's my favorite episode so far.
Well, and she's fabulous all the way around. But because of her, I'm looking at the way, because I have a 14-year-old daughter, I'm looking at the way we're going to be doing things moving forward, and that she's going to be doing things moving forward, because she is all about women's health. And, you know, a lot of people don't know all the risks and consequences and things that happen with the birth control pill. And she's just an advocate out there that is just doing so much good work. So I bet it's a really cool show.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So definitely listen to that episode on the 16th.
Well, before we run out of time, I would love it if we could maybe talk a little bit about food, because you are a chef and your recipes are fabulous. I've been reading your blog forever, and I'm curious, what do you eat these days? Do you have any favorite, simple recipes that you're making? Like, what's your diet like? Tell us everything.
Yeah, so this year was kind of weird because I did a low FODMAP diet with my SIBO treatment. And it's funny, I had written about that a few years ago, and it was another post that people just went bananas over because there's so few resources. Now there's a lot more. But I had to actually try out my tips that I had written without ever doing the diet. And I was like, oh, these are actually pretty good.
I love that.
But yeah.
That works out, right?
Yeah, it does. But I've backed off of that. Now I'm eating kind of much more of a diverse diet. I still don't eat a ton of legumes because that was kind of the one reintroduction in the FODMAP category that was a little rough on me. But besides that, really gluten-free is kind of my one non-negotiable. I don't eat a ton of dairy, like very rarely will I have dairy. Occasionally maybe yogurt or kefir, but and occasionally pizza, but gluten-free pizza, since there's such good options now.
Right.
But very rarely besides that. And yeah, I mean, I've always I think because I am a healthy comfort food chef of sorts, I've always tried to eat just like as many different vegetables as possible. And that's kind of my outlook on anti-inflammatory eating, is just to like fill the plate with as many vegetables as possible and then let the other things fill in the gaps. But I'm a huge carb lover, and so have never really quite been able to get on board with the zero carb lifestyle. And I also, just from all my research, it's not necessarily the answer for Hashi people. So thank God.
Well, and I read
people swear by it, but yeah,
they do.
Kind of controversial for
I thought it was interesting, really quick, to note that you were launching your first cookbook, and weeks before is when you received your Hashimoto's diagnosis. So like half the things in the book you couldn't eat. Yeah, well, not the diagnosis, but the elimination diet.
Elimination
diet. Okay, right. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, it was miserable. It was like
I can't even imagine.
On an elimination diet, like baking cookies for the parties and all that. But yeah, that was like kind of a fork in the road for my work journey, but also why it was like so painful at the beginning. I think some people just are, again, some people who don't care as much about food and have felt so horrible, I think once you get like the answer and what's plaguing you. Sometimes it can just be like a night and day, like, great, I'm never eating that again. When you're a food professional, it's a little more jarring.
Yeah. Yes. Very career changing for me. You know, I was working as a cooking instructor, and I started turning down classes. And then I was like, well, I'm just going to teach health oriented classes. At the time, I didn't even have a Hashi's diagnosis. I only had been diagnosed with hypothyroidism, and, you know, take your pill and go on your merry way kind of thing. But I just wasn't feeling well. And so I started figuring out, you know, those correlations between what I ate and how I felt. And then, yeah, here we are today. But
good for you, though.
It is, when you love food, it really does ask that you learn to paint with a new palette of colors, you know, and I've learned so much. I've just become, like you, such a vegetable lover and celebrator of, you know, these amazing gifts from the earth. Right. And
she has a really great garden.
Well,
and lucky you.
But you always have to figure out little tricks and ways to, like, put things together that still work for, you know, having friends over, feeding a 7-year-old, you know, things like that. Are there any favorite kitchen hacks that you feel have helped you survive your climb up health mountain, as you put it?
Yeah, well, first of all, that's such a beautiful way to put it. Cooking with a new palette. I love that. Especially since it's all very color related anyway.
Right.
So, I mean, as simple as it sounds, meal prep, batch cooking was a big game changer for me, especially as a cooking professional. I was oftentimes coming home exhausted and not wanting to cook for myself after having cooked for others so many hours of the week. So I don't do it religiously every week, but I do try and have just one dish always in the fridge. Sometimes it's like taking portions out of the freezer that I've pre-frozen from past cooking adventures, just so I'm setting myself up for success and not having to resort to takeout or a quick fix. Though there's nothing wrong with a quick fix every now and then. And then, yeah, for me, in terms of the way I develop recipes, it's more about the ratios. So, you know, I still try and keep in the things, like my husband is like a total carnivore. And so I still try and, you know, keep some beef or steak in there, but it's just like in the recipe itself, like the quantity ratio of like meat to a vegetable is like 50-50, if not like 25-75. And I don't think people quite realize it. But what they have on their plate, they'll just be forced to eat a more manageable and healthier quantity of vegetables versus the grains or the meat.
Right. So you kind of sneak it in there.
Yeah, it's
not really, but
yeah, it's not necessarily the part of the dish that people crave.
Right.
I just posted a Mongolian beef and broccoli recipe. You know, the lover of that dish probably is going in it for, I don't know, for the beef. What they're gonna get is a lot of broccoli.
And stir fries are great that way. It's like meat light cooking. Yeah, we do a lot of that.
It's really quick too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. So what are a few things that people can do right now when they're on their healing journey to begin their own wellness project? What are some tips that can help help people set themselves up for success?
Yeah. So my number one thing in the realm of healthy hedonism, which is my philosophy, do right by your body without giving up your life, is actually to set yourself up for success at home so you can find more flexibility out in the world. So for me, it was a long and steady process, not necessarily a 1 month by 1 month challenge, but switching all those personal care products to naturals over time was huge because it was just a one-time change for each thing. And I just never had to think about it again. And another one is putting a filter on my tap. And these are the kinds of things that you're not going to be given the kind of reward for these healthy actions overnight, you probably will not see a black and white difference in the same way that you maybe would if you changed your diet dramatically for a 30-day period. But when you're autoimmune, as you guys know, I mean, every little thing adds up. And that toxic burden is kind of the invisible fence holding you back in many ways that you might not realize. So I think the more that you can alleviate that burden just in your everyday life, and you're putting these products on your skin every day, you're drinking water every day, it takes a bit of investment, but it really does pay dividends down the road. And then also it's like you don't have to have the mental hula hooping that you have to have basically 3 meals a day with food around those choices. It's just like one and done, and you'll just be like at a better plane.
Right.
Yeah.
So one of the things I love so much about the Wellness Project is that you cover all that ground, those tenets of thyroid healthy living. Of all the months and the chapters in the Wellness Project, do you have one that you feel is the most fundamental?
I do. It was the last month, the stress month, the morning routine. I mean, as someone that's like my trigger, my like root cause, like it all lies in my gut. And there's just such a powerful connection between gut health, between, the brain gut axis and getting your stress in order. I mean, SIBO, huge correlation with stress. Autoimmune disease in general, huge correlation with stress. And it's something that is like, the journey there truly never ends. So constantly kind of setting myself up for success in terms of my schedule, and then, continuing to hone my toolkit in that regard with meditation and just, always coming back to having some sort of morning routine to set me up for success during the day. It's an ongoing process, but I think that is just some place that everyone should put their energy and effort.
Yeah. And basically it's not, you're not saying, you work on your stress and then it's done, because it never will be. It's ongoing. But I believe one of my favorite, I think this is Dr. Donnie Wilson, says she has her own steps for teaching people how to manage or work through stress, because it's always going to be there. So it's interesting because you said that. It's like, you want it to just go away. You want to go, okay, I have this magic pill or this magic, if I meditate, well then, but it's an ongoing process. And you're right.
Not as easy as filtering your water, for sure.
No. And it's nice because you mentioned, you put together a toolkit for yourself, so people can learn about that in the book.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you so much for being here with us, Phoebe. It's been such a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much, guys. We'll see you next time on another episode of Thyroid Refresh TV. Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye. Thanks, Phoebe.